Welcome to the Black Etc. podcast, a podcast about how ideas and culture spread amongst Black Americans, especially outside mass media. I'm your host, Ian Youssef. Today's guest is hip-hop writer and historian, journalist, and critic Dart Adams. Dart is a well-respected figure in the hip-hop media world. He's a go-to source for early hip-hop history, as well as anything relating to Black folks in Boston. I've known of and followed and been engaged with Dart for probably a couple decades now, first through the hip-hop blogosphere in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I've followed him everywhere since then. I spoke with Dart about the history of the hip-hop canon, what songs and albums were widely considered classic from the early days of rap all the way through today. A lot of the discussion centered around the medium of the album as a vehicle and the highest expression of musical genres. So for hip hop, it's interesting because that didn't really happen until a little bit later. So we talked about the development of the album. We talked about his idea of golden eras, which for him is marked by competition. And in hip hop, he's talking about basically the late 80s through early 90s. And then 92 or so through the middle of the 90s. So we just talked about an explosion and a wealth of artists. It's very nostalgic. It brought me back. We talked about a bunch of the publications that facilitated this music, all of the magazines that used to cover various aspects of hip hop, and eventually websites. We leaned heavily on the Source magazine, but we also talked about the limitations of that publication and the other publications that sprang up to fill in the gaps and blind spots that the Source had. We also talked about after the golden eras, where there was a split between mainstream rap and underground rap, and how that permanently changed how we thought about classics and classic albums, because in his view, most of the classics were coming from the underground and not the mainstream post 97 or so. One thing we didn't really get to talk about that I wish we had was technology. CDs, of course, changed how people thought about albums. People included more songs than they had on tapes or vinyl. But also, post-CD, the MP3 era, downloading and now streaming, that changed how people thought about albums. It, in many ways, diminished the primacy of the album and treated musical works as a buffet platter where people can pick and choose rather than a cohesive statement of artistic intent and creativity. So we didn't really get to talk about that. But what we do have here is extremely thorough. You may be able to tell that I'm a hip-hop head myself. I used to be a huge one. Stuff from the 80s through, I would say, the early 2000s is mainly my sweet spot. So all of the stuff he's talking about is right up my alley. I know all of these underground albums he's referencing, which to many people are obscure. Our tastes differ slightly. Some of them I'm really into. Some of them aesthetically I'm not really into, but I do think there is something to Dart's point that the form of the artistic album diminished greatly after the mid-90s in the mainstream, such that you're hard-pressed to find the kind of works where people are really trying to create albums in the mode of the classic golden era after the mid-90s. This episode was a lot like the debut episode with Jay Mumford about the history of funk drumming, as well as my episode with Dr. Psyche Williams-Forson. In both of those prior episodes, it took me a really long time to annotate. And in Dart's case, I spoke with him months ago, but it took me quite a bit of time to annotate and note and create links for all of the artists and publications he mentioned. So yeah, this is a lesson in hip hop history. If you're an old school head, if you're an 80s, 90s golden era fan, and if you were into underground rap from the late 90s to the mid 2000s, I think you'll have a good time. And even if you're not a rap fan, I still think it's interesting as an engagement with Black culture, media, publishing. So I hope you enjoy it. Today I'm here with author, journalist, historian, lecturer. I call him a hip-hop encyclopedia, Celtics superfan, guy who reps all things Boston and Black Boston every chance he gets. Dart Adams. Welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
What would you say were some of the earliest formal efforts to create a hip-hop canon?
In my opinion, it goes back to a defining moment in the history of the Source magazine. There was an issue that was called the Hip Hop Decade, and it changed everything. It created the idea of what is hip hop classic, and also the idea that rap had been around for over a decade. So now it's time to think about classic albums, classic singles. The idea of when we make this music, not only is it something that could be consumable or bought, it's art. And there are standards. And when standards come, that means that we have the same thing that we have in jazz, right? You have the standard, you have the classic, you have the material that's canonized. This is classic material, that idea. And I think that from there, that issue of the Source, it made fans and also artists alike think of, we need to contextualize what are the best works that we have to offer for this genre of music. And also, we have to follow these standards going forward.
Do you remember when about that dropped?
The issue was released in 1990.
Okay.
But I have to go back and find exactly what issue it was of the Source, because I remember the cover. It was like the rap decade. And also the wild part is that it was also his thesis for when he graduated from Harvard. And we're talking about, of course, Shecky Green, John Schechter.
People had to have talked about classic songs before then, right? So like, what were some of the first widely accepted hip hop classic songs?
I mean, the idea floated around, but I don't think it was like hard established, because you have to remember, rap is a recorded genre, starts, spring, summer 1979, and rap was single bass between 1979 and 1985, right after LL Cool J releases Radio at the end of 1985, November 85. So when you think about, like, we have 84, 85, 86 as that first wave of, okay, this is when we realize we really need to establish what a classic song is, right? So going back, we have 86 where like Rakim and Cool G Rap and KRS-One all enter the fold. But going back from there, you would count, all right, so you got Rapper's Delight, you got Christmas Rapping by Curtis Blow, you got The Breaks, you got songs like The Message, but also you have all these other songs like Rockin' It by Fearless 4, so you start to build up this idea of what's a classic. Also, like, Funk You Up by The Sequence. Then you start thinking about, what are the other songs around there? So, Funky 4 plus One More in 1980. The New Rap Language by Treacherous 3.
Yeah.
So it starts filling out from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You start thinking about, what are these landmark songs? What are these landmark songs? Then you have, like, the Crash Crew. And then you get to the era where you're like, all right, the new school. So you have the Houdinis, 5 Minutes of Funk. Then you have Run DMC, their first singles, 30 Days. And then, like, you have to think about, like, It's Like That. And that's the way it is, because it's a landmark song. It's very sparse. Doom, 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 doom. And, then you have to go back in thinking, okay, so what kicks off all this? Do you have Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force, Planet Rock?
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have to add Looking for the Perfect Beat. So you build out this idea of, like, what is a classic? What are these landmark songs? Because you're starting here in 86, 87 when the standard is different, when the bar is being raised for MCing. After Eric B. for President is released and Move the Crowd and all these other songs, you're like, okay, the standard is different. When you hear Curtis Blow, when he does like 8 Million Stories with Run DMC, you know, when you hear songs by like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know, freshest rhymes in the world, you start getting an idea like things are changing, things are switching. Because when you get to 87, you start hearing songs like Super Lover Scene Casanova Rudd, Do the James, Feeling James by Fresh Gordon, and the standard sonically, lyrically, thematically, these things change. And you start realizing that, okay, going forward, things are very different. Like, this is when, you know, ultramagnetic MCs pop up with, like, you know, Mentally Mad and Ease Back.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, so the things that I was hearing from Mantronics, like Fresh is the Word. Fresh is the Word was a landmark song in 85 for Mantronics when they released their first album. But in 86 and 87, it feels like we're already in another era. We're in another time.
Right. So
building out the canon happens right around there when we get into what I like to call the first golden era between 86 and 89. You know, because when you look at LL Cool J's first singles in 84, I Need a Beat, classic. But then you hear Dangerous. But then you hear like, I Can't Live Without My Radio in 85. And now you realize, okay, in 86, things are going to be a different animal. Because when you listen to a Run DMC album, the first 2 Run DMC albums, then you hear Raising Hell, you realize they already know they have to do different things in this era. But you can already hear that lyrically, sonically, they are towing the line. And if they take a wrong step, they could get left behind. Curtis Blow was the king of rap between 1980 and 1985. By 1986, they were already shipping this man out on an ice floe.
Right.
And he was like 27, 28. So you could see that things were turning. So when you're building out like the idea of what a classic is and what the canon is, it's expanding and it's changing because things are moving so quickly. In the early to mid 90s, technology, the speed of technologies, they said it doubled every 6 to 8 months. And when you think about rap at that time, it was a similar thing. We were in a highly volatile space and things were moving so quickly that it was hard to get a grasp on where things are headed next. So it was kind of a thing where we're building out, okay, this is dope, this is dope, this is dope. But then you go back 18 months later, 24 months later, and you're like, all right, this was a classic, this was a classic, this is a classic, to pick out from the field.
Okay, so let's go back to that source issue in 1990. By that time, a lot of the stuff you're talking about had already been left behind. So when they're crafting the idea of canon, what was considered great that they kind of left behind?
Well, I feel like by the time we're getting into 1990, another reason why they needed to establish is because I laid out that 1990 was this between time for the first golden era before we get to another golden era. And it was this shaky time because we entered what I like to call the pop rap era. And so standards had changed over, like what I talked about previously from, 86, 87, 80, 89. But in 1990, it was a different animal because De La Soul could make Me, Myself, and I in 1989. And it just be a song that crossed over. Whereas in 1990, record labels weren't satisfied with the rap group we have signed to this major sells 200, 250, 300,000 units. And we're fine with that. And we could give them 3 singles and 3 videos. But after the end of 1990, and I looked at a billboard from December 8th, 1990, and it blew my mind. The Billboard Top 200. It was topped by Vanilla Ice's To the Extreme and MC Hammer's Please Hammer Don't Hurt Him.
Right.
Vanilla Ice's To the Extreme was in its 12th week on the charts, and it has sold 4 million copies. And MC Hammer's Please Hammer Don't Hurt Him was number 2. Hard Stuck in number 2. It had been number 2 for at least 4 weeks, beside Vanilla Ice. And it has sold 7 million copies. And there was nothing close to it in the pop realm. So what this meant was it kind of sent this fear reverberating throughout the rap space. So you would look at a Salt and Pepper who had a hit with Expression, which crossed over. You look at Kid and Play, and you're like, okay, so now they're going to try to cross over. Because record labels are starting to pressure these groups. They're like, hey, you could sell more units than you do. And so that was this thing. Now, in terms of what had they left behind? Well, I feel like there were certain groups that were hot in 86, 85, going into 87, which they just didn't fit anymore. Like, the Boogie Boys were one of the most popular and successful rap groups in the era of 85, 86, and 87. We haven't discussed this yet. In order to get on radio, black radio, as a rap group, when the sun was still up, this is important. You had to have so many things go right. And the best thing that could happen to you was you had a song that hit, and they played it at the top of every hour. Because they got sick of requests. Now this is what the Boogie Boys did. The Boogie Boys had songs like A Fly Girl, Share My World, You Ain't Fresh. They did this multiple times. And they were seen as successful. UTFO could hit you with Roxanne, Split Personalities, Leader of the Pack. And then they put out their 1987 album Lethal, which a lot of people don't talk about, which had songs like You Cold Wanna Be With Me, Master Baby. That is a classic album. So I feel like what we're talking about is groups like the Skinny Boys, which were well regarded in like 86, 87, going into 88. But by the time we get to a 1989, 1990, they're kind of forgotten. They're the past.
That's true.
But I say the most successful group that kind of got shoved under the bus by that era was the Fat Boys.
Yeah.
The Fat Boys were up there with, I'll say, Run DMC and Houdini, right?
Yeah.
They're up there with Run DMC and Houdini in terms of popularity, in terms of importance, in terms of fan base, in terms of reach. The thing that people really forget about is that, like, it was about the live show, the live performance. The Fat Boys were amazing live. They were incredible entertainers. They toured, and they were teenagers, right? So by the time we get to 89, 90, the Fat Boys are kind of an afterthought.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like what really did them in was Disorderlies, probably.
No, I feel like after Disorderlies, they had one of their best albums, Crushing.
Right.
I think what really did them in was 1988.
Yeah, that year.
Yeah, the year 1988, because I think a lot of people got buried by 1988. I talked about this once. Run DMC has the Tougher Than Leather tour, right? The album comes out about March, April, right? They start the Tougher Than Leather tour. They go on the Tougher Than Leather tour with Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, whose album came out in February 1988. So 2 acts to have albums on the tour. As the tour goes on, they bring on Public Enemy, EPMD, and Stetsasonic. By the time the tour ends, Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince are bigger than Run DMC and selling better. By the time the tour ends, Public Enemy is bigger than Run DMC. Better, much better album, selling better, bigger act. By the time the tour ends, EPMD is a bigger act than Run DMC. The only act that wasn't bigger than Run DMC at the end of that tour was Stetsasonic. But Stetsasonics album is an all-time great album. They just, for whatever reason, things didn't go out with Tommy Boy, and they didn't sell. So when you think about that idea that they started that tour, and when the tour ends, Run DMC's at the bottom of the barrel of their own headlining tour, that just tells you everything you need to know. Like before I was talking about how things were moving so fast, 88 was an exponential time. So when you look at like the Fat Boys coming out of 88, I think they had an album Coming Back Hard Again. I cannot tell you what was on that album. It probably went gold. It likely went gold. I remember the cover. Never thought to buy it. So I think that's a lot of what was left. A lot of the mainstays, a lot of the main groups from that previous era, the groups that like we look to be the standard bearers, by the time 88 ends and we're in 89 going into 1990, they're forgotten about.
So let's go back to albums for a second. We talked about some songs and some albums here. What were some of the first classic hip-hop albums that people thought about?
For me, I think, again, Curtis Blow, was the king of rap between 1980 and 1985. Does have a classic album to his name, okay? So when we talk about classic albums, I feel like the very first are Run DMC, Run DMC.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Houdini Escape. We're talking about, if the first album's Houdini is Houdini, then Houdini Escape. You know, Houdini Back in Black. I feel UTFO's first album from 1985, a lot of people, you know, might fight on that. I think that's a classic. I feel as though, of course, King of Rock classic album. We're looking at LL Cool J's Radio 85, definitive classic album. And then 86 is, for me, the explosion. You got things like Just Ice, Back to the Old School. Eventually you have Salt and Pepper's Hot, Cool, and Vicious. You have albums like Mantronics the album, which I believe came out in 1985. I think that's an important one. But like, those are like the early, like, classic rap albums. The very first Skinny Boys album, 1986, on Warlock Records. That's a classic album. Of course, Raising Hell, Run DMC, the Beastie Boys, License to Ill. Like, these are definitive, you know, that first wave of classic albums, which we didn't necessarily think of in terms of being classic albums, because I always tell people this. When you look at how much people got paid for a job, minimum wage back then was about, what, $3.25? And you were spending $7, $8 on the tape. So as long as the tape was worth 2.5 hours of work, that was enough. It didn't need to be a classic. You didn't have that mindset yet. But again, around the time we get to 1990 and forward, when people are spending their $7.99 or their $6.99, and they're thinking about, this is going to be $7.34 with tax, $8.38 with tax, and I'm making $3.50 an hour, and I could eat with this, I could do this with this, I could just have my money in my pocket. It better be worth it for me to buy this album by this Criminal Minded, by Boogie Down Productions. It better be worth it for me to buy this tape, you know? Yeah. It better be worth it for me to buy this Super Lover Seeing Casanova Rudd, Girls I Got 'Em Locked. This EPMD album, and some people used to say EPMO because the D looked like an O. You know? It better be worth it for me to spend my money on this tape.
So that's from the fan's perspective. Are you saying that changed how the artists made the music and they start to, like, put more emphasis on creating albums that are more cohesive or better?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, in the early days, all that mattered was putting out an LP so you had enough songs that could justify you going on tour with a legacy funk or R&B soul act. You could be on the same bill with them. So when you look at the early rap albums that were released, mostly by people like on Sugar Hill, right? Yeah. So you're talking about Sugar Hill Gang. You're talking about The Sequence. You're talking about Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5. The albums are mostly filler. That 7 songs to 8 songs. You have the 2 singles, and then you have other songs that you have so you can fill out a set when you're on tour with these people. You're going to be on tour with Cameo. You're going to be on tour with Aura. You're going to be doing a show next to Dynasty. You're going to be on a bill with Lakeside. You know what I'm saying? So that's who we're going to be doing a show on, these type of bills. So all we need to do is have an LP with 7, 8 songs on it so we could just be out there and sell it, because everybody's going to be buying the singles anyway. That's what it's like in 80, 81, 82. Now, by the time we get past 85, things different, because people listen to the whole album. They're expecting the album to be good. Album can't just be filler. And this is something that Curtis Blow was able to get away with. Curtis Blow was the first rapper to have a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth rap album. Curtis Blow had a ton of classics, a ton of hits, like Basketball, 8 Million Stories, AJ Scratch. Like, you go down the list. You think that, like, LL Cool J has hits now, but the guy with the hits was Curtis Blow. He could do Tough. He could just, like, rock a whole show just doing songs, just do call and response with the crowd. And when you get to a certain year, man, that ain't enough. When you hear Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde made an album called The Champagne of Rap in 1985, right? The tail end of 85 going into 86. When you listen to that album, you can tell that they were like, we need to have at least 6 good songs on here, because we got to perform this shit live. And people going to flip over the tape and they want us to enjoy this tape. You need to have at least 30 minutes of an experience on this tape. And that's when things really changed. So yeah, it was very much a conscious effort. By the time you get to 86, 87, people are really judging themselves off of how good that album was. It's important to have the singles that people buy, but all that does is lead you to the LP. And if the LP is trash, then so is everything about you. Like now your reputation is tied to how good your album is. That's how it is in 87, 88 going forward.
I wonder if there's a parallel to like jazz and R&B where they started off as just singles or just started off as just songs. And then ultimately once the art form matures, you start getting people with artistic ambitions to create cohesive things. So they're, similar to the other genres.
Oh, absolutely. The LP era really kicked off both in, I'll say, rock and I'll say R&B, soul, jazz, and then funk. The LP era happened between 1965 and 1966. Mm-hmm. And that's when things really shifted. And a lot of it had to do with the way radio was formatted. Radio went from AM to FM, and people started programming radio around not just individual singles, but album tracks, songs off the LP that they could play on the radio. And then they became singles. And that ended up changing things, especially like in jazz, because some of those compositions in jazz, they start realizing this is what people come to see live based on the recording. Because the beauty of jazz wasn't like other genres where we're going to get the studio recording and have it be perfect and sound a certain way. Jazz was, we're going to do 18 takes. This is the take we're going to have. And people want to hear that when you perform, but also they want to hear what y'all do, as a unit, live, bouncing off each other. And then a lot of those recordings end up on albums. So it was like a reverse thing. But yeah, the LP era was very real with like, black music, between 65 and 66 going forward, because again, I love Stevie Wonder. I love Marvin Gaye, but not all of their albums are must-owns. There's a lot of Stevie and Marvin, 45s, that you can find in people's homes.
You're talking about the early stuff before they started consciously making albums.
Yes. Because there's a point, again, between 65 and 66 going forward, where you see things switch. Those Marvin albums are much more deliberate. They're much more thought out. And the same thing with Stevie.
Yeah.
When you get past 66, those Stevie albums hit a lot different.
Yeah, and I mean, that reflected their growing power, right? They had a lot of leverage with the record company doing all the writing and the star power. So, once Stevie's able to renegotiate that contract, he's able to get more creative freedom. Same with Marvin,
Yep.
Let's go back. I heard you briefly talk about 2 golden eras. Can you recap and kind of sketch out how you think of the golden eras in hip hop?
So for me, I'd say the first golden era begins January 1986 through 1989, stops January 1990. And that's what I call the pop rap era, that space in between. And I think the thing that kicks it off is LL Cool J's radio being on the Billboard 200 and the black music charts, and then LL Cool J being on both Soul Train and American Bandstand. That opens the door for everything that happens in rap in 86 going forward. And people realizing the power of the album and saying, okay, we have to go from being a single-based genre to an LP-based genre. And then more groups started getting signed to majors because, again, rap was usually the domain of the independents before, and that kind of turned on its head. There were still big players in the indie world and rap. You always had the Tommy Boys, which eventually got major distribution. The Def Jams, which eventually got major distribution. Tough City, which had major distribution and then, went to another distributor. You had Profile, Jive, but then Jive goes with Jive Zomba goes with RCA. So those were always like the labels at the forefront in terms of rap. And then things went forward from there. And then like 86, I mentioned a couple of like classic albums of 86 and 87. But by the time we get to the end of 89, we're getting into the new era where it opens with January 12th, 1990. The first single released by MC Hammer, which is Help the Children. People don't realize that.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah. And then, Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em comes out, and it's so crazy that the next single was supposed to be Dancing Machine. But people were taking the album and playing You Can't Touch This on the radio, off the album, off the CD, in the club. They were doing it so much that Billboard was reporting it in the dance play club charts, and it wasn't an official single. To the point where they had to call up, and this is insane, they had to call up Capitol and be like, stop pressing the Dancing Machine single. The next single has to be You Can't Touch This. Because they're playing it without it being a single.
Yeah.
It's going to be a hit. Can you imagine? And so this turns everything around because we also have a bunch of songs that were like big hits that crossed over. Biz Marquis' Just a Friend.
Yeah.
Crossover. Me, Myself, and I, it crossed over. Eventually songs like Funky Cold Medina and Wild Thing crossing over.
The Young MC joints.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Mentirosa by Mellow Mayonnaise.
That's right.
There were so many rap singles. Knockin' Boots by
Candyman.
There were so many singles that crossed over and were getting played on top 40 radio.
Yeah.
And when we get into this era, it completely changes everything in the rap landscape where they're like, all right, guys, if y'all can do this, y'all can get played on white radio. Y'all gotta do some different shit. And so that ends an era and enters another era where we get into a bunch of people that are like, it's almost paranoia, right? Where people are looking over their shoulder thinking, oh, you're trying to cross over. You're trying to cross over. When MC Lyte puts out When in Love, people are up in arms. When Queen Latifah puts out Fly Girl, is the first single from Nature of a Sister, people are up in arms. And then some other groups, like you think about Canine Posse, who put out their album before that, and they were just doing whatever they wanted to. And when they signed their next deal, their next album's called On a Different Tip, because the label wants to give them a crossover song, you know?
Right.
Because we were coming out of the era of hip house.
Yeah.
We were coming out of the era of every album had the house of the club song. Girl, I'll house you.
Jungle Brothers. Yeah.
You know,
Queen Latifah had them. Yeah.
Step into my house. Twin Hype. Yeah, Twin Hype. Nothing could save you. And On the Club Tip. So there was always that. There was even the club song on
NWA joint too.
Yeah, something for the radio, all that shit. And then also there was a song on Special Ed's album in 1989.
Oh yeah.
Him and Lady Kazan. So there was always that there. But what really changed everything is we enter the era of Technotronic. We enter the era of Black Box. We enter the era of Snap.
Yeah.
Italo disco, Euro club music. And that started contending directly with rap. And that changed a lot. Coming out of the Milli Vanilli thing, you know?
Yeah.
Milli Vanilli's early singles were on the rap charts. Girl, you know what's true? Tick, tick, son, who the poop it, son.
That's right, yeah.
Girl, is it dick, girl? It's dick, girl. And this is true. Girl, you know it's true. That was on the rap charts. Go back and look at the Billboard rap charts, right? So, like, to give you an idea how crazy it is, all these things changed, and it turned it, I say 1990, January 1990 on, into the pop rap era. And what starts the next era? We get into this new thing called, I hate the name, the alternative rap tag.
Yeah.
So this is when we get into, like, eventually things like Dream Warriors, Urban Dance Squad, Stereo MCs, PM Dawn. They don't want to give the tag to De La Soul because they're like, no. But if you go back and listen to the very first PM Dawn single on G Street, and they disappeared after this song, they released the first single, and it sounded like they were biting De La Soul.
That's true.
I believe it was like Ode to a Forgetful Mind or something. Do. Like, people really were like, oh, y'all trying to sound like De La. And they disappeared for a while, then they come back with Set Adrift on Memory Bliss. So that was like, oh, this is an alternative rap. This is what rap could sound like. You know, I don't know if you remember, out of Dallas, there was this duo. It was DJ Zero and MC 900 Foot Jesus.
Yeah.
This is that era. New Kingdom. Stuff like that. And so there was that coming out. And eventually we get to groups like, you know, Arrested Development, you know, stuff like that. But we get to the new era of what rap is 92 going forward, January 92, because this is when Fushnikins dropped their album. This is when an event happens because BDP is about to drop their new album coming out, Sex and Violence, I believe. And what happens is Prince B does a couple of interviews with major magazines, and he criticizes Public Enemy and, this is a mistake, KRS-One's role in Boogie Down Productions.
Right.
He said Public Enemy were making mountains out of molehills. And then he said KRS-One, a teacher of what? Now, you go back and look at how old Prince B was.
You're talking about Prince B from PM Dawn.
Yes, Prince B from PM Dawn. Yeah. How old he was when he said these things. That man had no idea what he was about to unleash on the world. And the thing is that Chuck D sought out KRS-One and said, you see this shit? You see what he said about us? And Chris was like, yeah, absolutely, I do. So Chris was like, all right, when are they performing next? Turns out they were performing at this venue in January 1992. Early January. It's also supposed to be, I believe, T-Money's birthday party. T-Money of Yo MTV Raps. And so KRS-One came with his crew. He was right there by the stage in the hood. He had already prearranged all the stuff to go down. And when they came out to rock, they were rocking the crowd at first. And then his people come on, rush the stage, punch the DJ, I believe Minute Mix or whatever his name was. And they take Prince B, punch Prince B, throw Prince B off the stage, and they start rocking the show. And from that moment, that night is when I believe the second golden era began. Because DJ Clark Kent was there. And DJ Clark Kent was one of the DJs who also knew what was going down. And he played songs from the upcoming DOS Effects album, Dead Serious, on East West, because he was an A&R at Atlantic. So that event right there marks the beginning of the second golden era. And 1992 was hailed as the year of the underground. And when you look at all the albums that came out that year and the sound and the aesthetic, EPMD talking about crossover and the song Crosses Over. And then the other funny part is that, and back in 1991, you have like Third Base. And Third Base was making fun of Vanilla Ice and people trying to cross over, you know, making the easy song where you take the popular song, you make an easy version of it, and then you like make the hit. So they made fun of it by taking Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer and making a song called Pop Goes the Weasel as a joke. It's their biggest hit. Yeah. It gets played on rock radio, gets played on top 40 radio. EPMD makes a song called Crossover using the simplest thing they can find. Whatever you want, whatever you need, newest song. Crossover. It crosses over. So it's like this hilarious thing where it's like people like, hey yo, don't try to like do the simple thing, the easy thing and cross over, and now you got a gold plaque. And now you're on not only the Arsenio Hall show, you're performing on like Dave Letterman.
So I'm trying to read between the lines here, right? If you're saying that the first golden era, which was in like mid to late 80s through 90,
yes,
and then the second one in like 92, and it was offset by kind of a dead period of crossover, you know, crossover stuff that isn't, for lack of a better word, is not considered authentic, or we would just say whack back then.
Yeah.
So then you're marking the golden eras as stuff that is not crossover, whack, pop-ish. I'm trying to draw out why you're defining them as golden.
So for me, golden eras are based on competition.
Okay.
All right. Golden eras for me are based on competition, top to bottom. And also, I think it's important for there to be diversity, right? When you look at the entire landscape of rap in 86, 87, 88, 89, you look at who's on a rap tour. I'll give you an example. NWA could go on a rap tour. And who's on the tour with NWA? The hardest rap group in the world. They're going on tour with DLC. They're going on tour with MC Hammer. They're going on tour with JJ Fad. They're going on tour with Fila Fresh Crew. But they're also bringing, Eazy-E has his own set, but they're also bringing Kwame. They're also bringing Kid and Play.
Yeah.
You can have Two Live Crew, but they're also going to bring either like another dance group, you know, to come on and perform, because you have to even out the show. Right? So when you look at like Public Enemy will go on tour with Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. And then Jazzy Jeff and then they bring Salt and Pepper. So you might have a couple of dates where you have Too Short come out, or you have Two Live Crew come out. But you also have, Redhead Kingpin in the FBI. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Dougie Fresh in the Get Fresh crew.
Yeah.
All on the same tour. Nobody's batting an eyelash. No one's like, why is Ice-T on the same tour as like the most pop dancey rap group? And you realize that it's not a big deal for Eric B and Rakim to be on the same bill as like a group that is the total antithesis of them.
Yeah.
De La Soul to be on this bill. De La Soul be on the same bill as, a Big Daddy Kane or, Paris, the Black Panther of hip hop. So, like, I didn't divide my tapes. I didn't take like my MC Light tape and move it away from like Compton's Most Wanted. So to me, there was this diversity top to bottom and everybody had their different approach. Like, I loved Kid and Play as much as I did NWA. So I think that is an important part. Jungle Brothers were just as important to me as Just Ice. When I look at an era, I think that that's crucial. You got the Two Live Crew and you have King Son. Like, I think that that's important when you look at, like, top to bottom, what makes an era great.
Yeah.
Because you could have the crew that comes out and does the dance routines, and then, like, you have the crew that's just, like, hard, just, like, rappity rap, 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 rap. And to me, like, it was all part of a completely balanced breakfast. So, I think people make the mistake of everything has to be in the same box.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely not. When I watch movies, I need diversity. I need a wide array of perspectives and styles. I need character-based stuff. I need international films. I need films written by women's perspectives because I want to learn something. I want to get wrinkles in my brain, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the same way I look at the eras of rap. And I think that one of the big issues with that interregnum from between 1990 and 1991 before we get to 1992 is that a lot of it was in upheaval because so many people are paranoid and looking over their shoulder about, am I trying to cross over? Do you think I'm trying to cross over and beefing with each other across the aisles? Mm. So it couldn't just be Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince are just making the music that feels right to them. Because you look at that album and you're like, how come your album in 1989 was a drop-off? Because you were trying to chase the success of the previous album. Mm-hmm. But you didn't drop an album in this era because you didn't feel like you fit in it. And also, you was like, I'm just going to go on the TV because I don't know what the fuck's going on with rap now. And then when you do come back, it's when things stabilize. And that's when Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince made Home Base. Mm-hmm. You notice? They didn't make Home Base until we're in another era. Right. And we have an idea where we're going. They didn't even attempt to drop an album after, the album in 89, In This Corner, I Think I Could Beat Mike Tyson. They didn't even drop another single. Fresh Prince was like, hey, yo, Jazz, let's make a TV show. So for me, I think that's the thing more so than this doesn't sound authentic. This doesn't sound real. Mm-hmm. It's more like, have we figured out where we're headed and do we have the freedom necessary and the diversity necessary to push this thing forward?
So once you get into the second golden era, let's say the mid 90s, right? Early to middle 90s, how do efforts to canonize hip hop change as opposed to what it was when you mentioned that source issue?
It changes again. The first time I feel like it started with an issue of the source. And I think the second wave had to do with yet another issue of the source. The April 1994 issue of the source about Nas's Illmatic. This completely reframed the idea of classics again. Because it declared an album a classic before anybody actually heard it. Mm. We heard it, trust us. This album is a classic, trust us, top to bottom. This is one of the best things you'll ever hear in the history of rap. It's redefining the genre. He's the second coming of Rakim. This is 1994.
Yeah.
So now, back at this era, like people are measuring themselves by the classic albums of the era. People are measuring themselves by the classic albums that dropped now. That is a very different thing. And what happens from this timeline? From Illmatic, we get Biggie and Ready to Die. From this, we go directly into all these Wu albums. Because what they were following, a lot of people didn't realize this, the blueprint a lot of these people were following was, this is wild to say, the Chronic.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going from Illmatic, Biggie Ready to Die. We're going into things like Mobb Deep, the infamous, Raekwon, Only Built for Cuban Links, into like stuff like Jay-Z, Reasonable Doubt, you know, all these things in between. This is our North Star. I have to compete with this. So when AZ's putting out Do or Die, he's weighing his album against these albums that are out. That is wild.
Yeah.
The Wu-Tang Clan are weighing that album against the last Wu-Tang Clan album. So when Raekwon puts out his album, he's weighing his album against like Old Dirty Bastard's album.
Right.
Or he's weighing the album against Jizz's album. And this is what people are doing. And that changes everything. Because before you were chasing dragons. You were chasing goats in a sense. You're chasing your contemporaries from 94 on.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time we get to A Reasonable Doubt, and then when Nas drops his second album, and this is something that is very important for me to stress, there is this divide. And again, we have micro generations. Every 3 to 5 years is a new generation in black music and culture, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's a different entry point. Usually you get into things between the ages of 9 and 13. That's something people forget about, right? You're not usually aware of what's going on in the canon or pop culture or anything like that until you're that age, usually. Unless you're young and you got aged up and now you care about it as age 5, 6, what have you. You had to have somebody older around you to influence you to even care. Because how would you know? You don't read trades. You're not watching, the video channels like that. You're not out going to the record stores and buying tapes, usually at that young age. You're not aware of what's on the radio like that. You don't know who's on what label.
Mm-hmm.
You know who producers are. So this is what I'm getting to. But what ends up happening is by the time you get to when Illmatic has been the last album and now Nas is about to come back where the second album was written, the day it was written drops. Me and my brother had already been listening to Reasonable Doubt for a full week. And when we go to buy It Was Written, we're also buying De La Soul, Stakes is High. So, I'll never forget this. I take my Reasonable Doubt tape out of my Walkman, right? And I put in the De La Soul, Stakes is High tape. I let my brother listen to It Was Written first. So when I hear It Was Written, I was coming off a week of listening to Reasonable Doubt, which is an almost perfect album. And I had just listened to De La Soul Stakes is High, which is another almost perfect album.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm putting in It Was Written, which I'm weighing against what? His last album, which was what? Almost perfect.
Right.
And to pour more salt in the wound, I was 18 going on 19 when I bought my copy of Illmatic. I'm 20 going on 21 when I'm listening to this now. For me, It Was Written felt like a pronounced step down from not only Illmatic, but it felt like a pronounced step down from Reasonable Doubt. And it felt like a pronounced step down from the tape I just heard, De La Soul's Stakes is High.
Mm-hmm.
And without that context, it's hard to explain to somebody who their entry point to Nas was, If I Ruled the World, which I thought was corny.
Me too. So we talked a lot about the source. What were some of the source's blind spots, right? I know that they're considered by some critics to be East Coast centric, East Coast elitist, that kind of thing. But what do you think are some of their blind spots?
I definitely think that they were elitists. I definitely think that they didn't give regional rap enough of a chance. I do think that they fought for standards, but I think that they took it too far in a lot of cases. They loved West Coast rap that sounded like it was influenced by the East Coast.
That's
you
right.
know?
Yeah.
They loved them some Far Side. They loved Souls of Mischief. They loved Hyro. They loved everybody who was on the Project Blowed, everybody who was from like the Good Life Cafe crew, right?
Yeah.
Loved them. Didn't necessarily love everybody else.
Yeah, but even before that, they liked Ice Cube when he was working with the Bomb Squads, like the America's Most Wanted stuff. They really liked, and even Death Certificate, they kind of liked.
I mean, they liked Ice-T, but Ice-T had the Rhyme Syndicate. And on top of that, Ice-T was part of the he was Zulu Nation.
Mm.
People forget that. Ice-T was Zulu Nation.
Yeah.
Ice-T was Zulu Nation before a lot of dudes on the East Coast was Zulu Nation. He was rolling with Africa Islam. That was his man.
Mm-hmm.
His right-hand man. So, like, a lot of people forget all that stuff. But, yes, and I also think another thing that people don't realize about, and I've had this conversation with several people, in terms of the source, they look at the ratings. They think the mics were rigged. And the issue is that I said that what makes the golden era is the high level of competition and diversity.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in a golden era, the problem is your contemporaries, your competition, everything is so high. Everything is so good that the smoke has to clear and years have to pass before you realize these 3.5 mic albums were classics.
Yeah.
Because you're weighing everything you're going against the field.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody in the field is great, then it's going to take a while before you realize that, oh, wait a minute. That OC album that I heard in 1994, which was really good compared to the other stuff I heard, when you get to 1997, you realize, oh, this was a goddamn classic.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing. But for me, the big thing about the source is I think the source, they kind of got high in their own supply in a lot of cases. And they were like, we are the arbiters of all that is righteous and holy and great in rap. And you don't make it. Bam. And when you look at like some of the reviews that they drop, they don't age well. I think the worst review in terms of aging overall, I feel might be the 3 that they gave The Shining by Smith & Wesson.
Yeah, that's a great album.
That is egregious.
So who are some of the other folks or the other publications that were kind of pushing back on what the source was doing if they weren't as inclusive as they should have been?
I think first and foremost, you had Rap Pages, which really kind of picked up the baton and ran for a lot of the West Coast artists. And, you know, some of the people that fell through the cracks that weren't covered by the source, I believe they were good at that. This is how you get a Murder Dog. This is how you get an Ozone magazine that starts covering the South, because you have to remember that the source had an amazing frothing at the mouth fan base, a fervent following. You know, they were big on newsstands. They had an incredible circulation, but when you put, like, let's say we're going to try to do something different. We're going to put Luther Campbell on the cover of the source. The next month, the mail that they got was just overwhelming. Why did you put Luke on the cover? That was this. This was ass. This was butt. You shouldn't have done this, X, Y, and Z. So a lot of times we want to diversify. We want to step out and, you know, give light to other things and write about other things outside of our wheelhouse. And the fans or the readers who pay the bills were like, no. So a lot of times they couldn't even do that. But then sometimes you look at the reviews of some of these albums and you're like, you listen to the album and you're like, yo, they really didn't listen to this record. They didn't even give this record a chance. You know what I'm saying? Like, they gave this a 2.5. Like, that's ridiculous. You know? And so, like, that, I feel like that was the thing. And then also you have, what really happened later on is after the mutiny happened of the source in 94, after I believe it's the 94 issue with, I believe, Gangstar on the cover, and this, the Almighty RSO feature, 3-page feature. Mm-hmm. That's when the mutiny starts in the first breakdown of the Mind Squad. And this is when John Schechter kind of, leaves. There will be more. This led to the creation of, in 1995, well, you would have Ego Trip, you'd have Stress Magazine, you'd have On the Go. Later on, you'd have Mass Appeal, you know, and like on the West Coast, you'd have magazines like Subculture. I really feel like without us ever getting an Ego Trip or a Stress or a Mass Appeal, you know, or On the Go, we don't get rap journalism like we expect. And I think another publication that does not get anywhere near enough credit that was out even, I feel, right before the source even started is the UK had a magazine called Hip Hop Connection, HHC. Mm-hmm. And that is easily one of the best rap publications ever in existence. I think it's kind of up there with the source. If you know anything about like the UK rap scene, and I think it's very important.
So let's fast forward a bit. What do you think about modern, I would say like in the social media era, efforts to create hip hop canons?
It falls way short because people are missing context. I think one of the big issues is that, as I've already said, people have blind spots. And a lot of times and purism, I hate the word purism in terms of rap because I feel like it was never pure, because when the first rap records came out, it kind of killed the idea of what was pure because they completely removed the essence of the DJ and they had like a band playing the records, it's like, so I don't get purism, but the people that are like the gatekeepers in terms of what is classic, what is, the standards that we should be beholden to, what should rap sound like to get praise, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're not inclusive enough. So one of the pushbacks is people try to overcorrect and they try to include things that just don't reach the standard necessary to be considered classic.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are missing proper context and knowledge of what actually came out. Because I always have to explain to people, after we get to I say the 97 to like 2002 are two different eras, one on the mainstream level, one on the indie underground level. And, you had two rap industries existing simultaneously, separate and unequal. And between 1997 and 2002, and I think you keep going forward until like 2005, 2006 and onward, the overwhelming majority of classic rap albums released after 1997 were released through independent and underground means.
Mm.
And the difference was back in the day, like KMD made a classic album in 1991. It sold like 100,000 units. Mr. Hood, right?
Yeah.
But it was on a major label. They had 3 videos. They were on MTV. They were on BET. So the reach is different, even if it only sold 100,000 copies.
Mm.
However, an independent rap album that was released in 1987, 1998, 1999 might have sold 25,000, 30,000, 40,000, or fewer units.
Mm.
So that means fewer people heard it, fewer people know it exists,
Yeah.
and people completely oblivious. So they'll fill in the blanks by saying that like Dipset, Diplomatic Immunity is a classic. I heard Diplomatic Immunity, and I was like, this album has way too much filler. Or Cameron's Purple Haze, just a classic. I'm like, what did you hear that year? I'd be like, okay, so you heard these albums. Did you hear Blazing Arrow? No, you didn't hear Blazing Arrow. You never heard a Company Flow album. You never heard a Cannibal Ox album. Not that it would be a cup of tea anyway, but I'm saying you weren't even in the space to know it existed,
Mm.
You never heard a Cunning Linguist album before. You never heard Panacea Ink is My Drink. You never heard Asimov and Now, So that was always like my issue with a lot of things. You never heard an Athletic Mike League record in your life. I was trying to explain to people that there are so many classic albums that were released that people haven't heard. There's an album by a artist named Invincible.
Detroit, right?
Invincible out of Detroit. The album's called Shapeshifters.
Mm.
This is one of the greatest rap albums, top to bottom, released of all the zeros. And I think about how few people own that album, know that album exists. I wrote about it back in 2008, maybe 2009. That album is incredible. I had to go back through my crates to find it, pick the CD, put it in the one MacBook I have that has a CD slot in it, and listen to it. And I was like, this album is amazing. And there are a lot of albums like that. There are groups like Blue Scholars, Bayani. I believe it's from 2007, maybe? 2006 or 2007. Like, there's so many albums like that. Jake One's White Van Music, and Symbolic One's group, and Little Brother, Tanya Morgan. A lot of people look at like Tanya Morgan and they're like, Brooklyn Addie's a classic. I'm like, Moonlighting was a classic. But how many people heard Moonlighting?
Now, how is it possible that in the information age, I guess it might be the same story in other media and genre, that people have not heard of all these things? People are more connected, right? There's more information out there. But how is it possible that even looking backward, people just don't know about all this stuff?
If Black Milk wasn't on All Right, people don't know that he existed.
Mm.
If Black Milk wasn't on XXL.com, people didn't know he existed. If Black Milk wasn't on Rap Radar, if they weren't being featured on Rap Radar, a lot of people didn't know they existed.
Yeah.
You would have to have been on OK Player. You would have to have been a member of something like the Census in the UK. You would have to have had your ear, like the blogs I wrote, my boy FWMJ had Rappers I Know. Andres Kovar had, classic drug references. I had poisonous paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you weren't in those specific type of places, you completely missed it. And like, that was the niche that I had because I was seeing what happened when we lost a lot of the magazines I was just talking about. Blaze died, not that it was great, but we lost Stress. Ego Trip folded and started making books. And then you have like On the Go is over. Subculture doesn't publish anymore. So where's the diversity in storytelling? Because the source had morphed into something different because now the source is battling XXL. And when you read early issues of XXL, it's a far cry from what it became later. And then you had Elliot Wilson jump from the source to XXL and like he had this vendetta against the source. And pretty much what happened was, you know how Oprah was on the cover of every issue of Oprah magazine?
Mm-hmm.
XXL pretty much became G-Unit and Shady monthly.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that because they knew that they were directly at war with, Ray Dog, who had taken over the source and kind of made it like, I'm going to leverage the ad space in the source for labels and also use it to further my career and my agendas. And the mics are going to be for sale. And it kind of kills the reach of, hey, we could have put a lot of people on to some really great rap music.
I think we share a commitment to the album as a form of artistic expression, as in some ways like the highest pinnacle of musicians making recorded music. I wonder, is that just bias, right? And is there a way to conceive of the hip hop canon outside of the album?
No.
No?
I think the album has to be the focus. The reason why the album has to be the focus is because the genre became what it was when the standard was set that you have to make a concise album.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make a body of work for us to consider this something worthy of praise. And when we look at the history of music, the genre of the music wasn't taken seriously, rock either, until the album became the focus. Because before it was Moni Moni, Wooly Bully, Splish Splash, I was taking a bath, Chantilly Lace, and it's like, yeah, you can make a bunch of hits because it used to be about the hit parade. So when you look at the teenagers as a group, they had like 15, 12, 20 hits, right?
Mm-hmm.
But people bought the singles and the albums were just like, oh, we just put the album out. People don't think of these early rock groups by their albums.
Mm-hmm.
They think of them by the hits that they had that were in the top 40.
Mm-hmm.
The genre got taken seriously when people were buying the full albums and playing the full albums like it was an experience. And this is when we get journalism that covers it the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jazz journalism was a different animal entirely because it wasn't even based about LPs. It was based about the recording period and the musicians and the lore of the musicians.
Right.
And the traveling bands that they had. Then when it became LP based, the standard of journalism shifted because we have to take it seriously. So we have to look at it differently and we have to contextualize it for the audience because it's important enough that we have to do that. So I think that in that same respect, it's important for us to look at the music through the lens of the album.
So now we get to the questions that I ask all of my guests. What songs got people on the dance floor when you were going out dancing at your peak?
So we're talking about like 87, 88, and all that. So we got to talk about I Want Her by Keith Sweat, Groove Me by Guy, Just Got Paid, which is an all-time great joint. Not That Type of Girl by New Edition. Oh, It Takes Two. Rob Bass, DJ Easy Rock.
Yeah.
Ooh, there was a group called Today.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they had the song, the dance, extended dance version of Girl, I Got My Eyes on You.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the all-time great dance versions in the history of history. So songs like that, absolutely. People would do full routine. We did full routines to those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd have to say like that. Those songs are all like from 87, between 87 and 89. And that's when like, it was just the height of clear out the dance floor. We got people dressed alike who are about to throw down.
Right. What is a Black cultural work in any genre or medium that's a classic but is underappreciated?
Oh, this is an excellent question. And for me, I have Space is the Place by Sun Ra.
Oh, yeah.
I feel as though we look at like Sweetback's Badass Revenge, you know, it was like people give that the respect it deserves. You look at like Watch Stacks. I think that that's a movie or a concert film that people look at and they're like, they give it the props that it deserves. I feel that Space is the Place is so ahead of its time and so iconic that I don't think nearly enough people truly appreciate it the way they should. I would probably also add to that probably Black Wax / Is That Jazz by Gil Scott Heron. I don't think nearly enough people appreciate that existing.
Great choices. What particular dish did your family make that you looked forward to the most growing up or look forward to the most now?
For me growing up, my mom was going to make fried chicken with rice or fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. And that quite literally was the thing I looked forward to absolutely the most. Like that, yeah, like nothing was going to beat that. As soon as I saw the pan come out and the coating, you know, both sides and drop it right in, you hear the and that rice is already going. I was like, oh, it's going to be a good day. Or the mashed potatoes, because I used to whip the mashed potatoes because I like the mashed potatoes to be like, you know what I'm saying? Damn like puree, you know, drop the butter in, drop the milk in. Like I just be whipping the shit out the mashed potatoes. So yeah, that.
Yeah. Well, Dart Adams, thank you so much for this discussion. I had a great time. Where can people find you?
You can find me at Dart_Adams on Instagram. You can find me at, I believe, dartadams.bluesky.app on Blue Sky. You can find me on Medium. So as dartadams.medium.com, and do not attempt to add me on anything other than that. Because if you try like Facebook, you might as well just find my old high school locker and drop a note in there because I'll go there before I go to Facebook.
All right. Thanks so much. Hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Warren.
I would like to thank Dart Adams again for a hip hop history lesson, really. It's always amazing, and I'm really fortunate to be able to talk to people who have this firsthand knowledge and can share it with us. You can find Dart on Blue Sky at Dart Adams, no spaces, and you can find him on Medium, Dart_Adams. The immediate lesson I took away from this discussion is that balance and diversity is important. Dart is talking about how he liked NWA as much as the Fresh Prince, how all of these various rap groups with different styles, different emphases, different persona were able to tour together, and it was not a big deal because they represented the totality of the fandom. You didn't have siloed fans, only gangster rappers, only happy rap, only pop rap, only political rap. Everybody was together back then in the 80s and early 90s. And I think the music and the fandom were all better for it. You can tell that Dart had a little bit of criticism for the pop era, but he wasn't really diminishing the music as much as somebody like myself would, you know? I didn't really like the pop rap. Definitely didn't like Vanilla Ice. I wasn't too keen on Hammer ultimately, although I liked him a little bit when I was a kid, some of the early dance joints. But he's critical of the machine that created the pop era, but he's not as critical of the artists. So a lot of times when you have people who are associated with the underground, as critics of the mainstream, you get this hard and fast critique of commercialism, selling out pop and all of that. Dark doesn't really have that as much. In fact, he talked about the issues that derive from people worrying about selling out too much and trying to be authentic and all of that, and critiquing those on the other side. So even amongst people with a critical mind, even those of us who are wary and skeptical of corporate power and corporate consolidation and control over the range of the music styles, diversity is important, and valuing all types of hip-hop expression aimed at multiple types of audiences is key. And I think this is generalizable to Black cultural work broadly. As much as I really dislike the control that corporate forces and the mainstream have on Black culture today, I do think it's important to appreciate people who operate in that space, given those limitations. And to paraphrase Dart, there's no such thing as purity, and we'd be wise to remember that. Thank you so much for listening. As always, please visit the site blackedcpod.com, like, rate, review, share on whatever platform you use to listen. Until next time.